The 7 is an uncodified emergency ordinance of the Council of the City of Solvang enacting a temporary moratorium on eviction for non-payment of rent by residential and commercial tenants who have been harmed financially as a result of COVID-19. So this is a local emergency resolution, and I would actually pass it on to the city attorney to do most of the staff report.
Approximately 2 weeks ago, the governor issued an order which allowed local jurisdictions to adopt moratorium like this and urged that they be adopted. He did not actually include in his order such a moratorium. We were contacted by, I believe, our state assembly member, our state senator,
Senator.
Yeah, and several others urging the city to adopt such a moratorium. A number of cities around the state have done that. A number of cities in Santa Barbara County have done that. The county of Santa Barbara has adopted such a moratorium. Most of them deal with residential properties. The city of Santa Barbara did include commercial properties. Again, in an attempt to try and keep some of your legal fees low, I will tell you that I took a lot of the city of Santa Barbara's ordinance. I think it was, in this instance, particularly well written. They worked with the Santa Barbara Property Owners Association and some of the larger property owners. As Zena mentioned, the governor has then come back and issued another executive order which now does impose a statewide moratorium on evictions for residential tenants. It, however, doesn't include a lot of detail in how it's to be implemented, and it basically leaves that largely to the courts. The courts are actually not in session right now, so I guess we will see how that ends up working out. This one, I'll just mention some differences between what we've proposed and the governor's order as we have it available now. In the area of residential tenancies, we have included a 20-day period. Essentially, it's called a look back. So for the month of April, a residential tenant would have until April the 20th to pull together their documents and let their landlord know that they need to have relief. In the governor's order, he only provided a 7-day look back. One of the reasons the city of Santa Barbara used that 20-day look back, one of the reasons that we had recommended that is it's going to, we expect, take a little while for your residents to even know that you have this program, to figure out what they're going to have to provide in the first month. So you could use the 7 days that the governor has used, or you could use any longer period that you feel is appropriate. You can be essentially more protective. You can't be less protective of tenants in adopting your own local ordinance. Another difference is that we've provided here for how repayment does occur after the end of the moratorium period. In the instance that we're suggesting and what Santa Barbara worked out with their property owners group was that after the end of the moratorium, payments must begin immediately on the then current rent, and tenants would have 6 months to repay the rent that had been essentially deferred. And this really is, it's a deferral. It's very clear in the ordinance that tenants still have the obligation to make rental payments. Those will continue to accrue. It also makes clear that this is only for the failure to pay rent beginning on April the 1st. If they're already behind, if they were already in some sort of a eviction process, that can move forward. I would note, though, that courts are closed. They're not handling civil matters right now. Those are the differences here between the governor's order and what we've suggested. Again, we've also included commercial tenancies. That's not covered at all in the governor's order. And again, the same two issues would be there. We're suggesting a 20-day look back. You could do 20 days, you could do 7 days, as the governor has for residential tenancies. You can pick a date in between. We also have not been as strict as the governor's order in what must be shown by the tenants to prove that they have a hardship. You could just adopt what the governor has adopted. He's requiring that you actually document that you had COVID, or that you had somebody in the family who had COVID, or you had to take care of somebody who had COVID, or some other standards like that. We think it's going to be difficult to really document and prove that in the relatively short period of time that we're talking about. But again, we suggest that if you decide to do this at all, you let us know if you want to include commercial tenancies or not. You make that decision, what's the appropriate look-back period, and you make that decision whether 6 months is the appropriate repayment for the deferred rent, or if it should be a longer or shorter period of time. I would suggest, again, that's one of the things I see wrong with the governor's order is no one knows how long the repayment period is.
6 months from the end of when this crisis is over and we start to open businesses back up.
Yes,
Thank
correct.
you. Can I ask a couple questions?
Go ahead.
Do we know what and I apologize for not knowing this, what the commercial vacancy rate is in the TRC right now? I'm going to put you on the spot because I don't know it.
Do you mean right now, or do you mean,
No.
for example, a month ago?
A month and a half ago.
We don't have an exact
Okay, thank you.
number, no.
I'll talk to Tracy about that. Okay. Go ahead. That's the last question I have. I have a comment about this whole thing as well. You want that now or later?
Yeah, there. So that was so questions
Okay.
first, and then with that, if there's no other questions from the council, Karen, any questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess the question would be, Chip, you were saying that we should ask for some sort of proof that they are affected by the COVID-19 before going ahead and adopting this ordinance?
No, I'm saying you could do that. I'm saying that the governor's executive order seems to require such proof. I don't know whether people are really doing that or not, or whether they're simply accepting people's statements. One of the things we do include in here is that landlords, if they receive information, cannot share that with others. That's a HIPAA issue. And I have a concern about the governor's order because it doesn't seem to address that HIPAA question. So I suspect, again, as with many things with the governor's orders, we're going to get guidance in a few days from the Office of Emergency Services, who then comes up with guidance every time the governor has a broad order.
What is our ability to enforce this? If we make this ordinance, what is our ability to enforce this with local landlords?
So the way that it works is that when the courts do reopen, if they were open now, if a landlord brings an action for eviction, the tenant can bring certain defenses to that action for eviction. By adopting this ordinance, we are creating a defense for an action of eviction that if the eviction is solely based upon the failure to pay rent during this time period, the tenant can show that their inability to pay was based upon a COVID-based emergency, and that would be a defense to the eviction during this time period.
Are there any other questions of the staff report?
Public comment?
Okay, with that, we'll go to public comment. Do we have any callers?
Are there any callers? No callers?
Do we have any public comment that we received written?
I don't.
Okay,
No.
don't believe we received any written. With that, We'll take this back to the council for discussion and action.
I have a comment.
Robert?
Okay, say for example, these businesses it's funny you say, how do you prove that you've lost revenue? Well, my door's locked. You can kind of see it around town. But these shops are shut down for 3 months. I hate for a local government to get involved for something like this, because what landlord would be stupid enough to evict somebody that's going to take at least 30 days, to have a place sit empty where he makes nothing, and then once the economy comes around, list it with a commercial real estate broker or tries to rent it out himself. It doesn't make any sense for a landlord not to work with his tenant to stay in a building. So the way you've described it and the way it's worded, I'm more happy with it. But that was my first, just as like, why are we getting involved in this? For a landlord to be dumb enough to leave a place empty. Who's going to move into that restaurant when he kicks out the guy that had the restaurant before? No one, because you have no customers. So I think it's a matter of landlords and tenants working together without us involved. But the way you've worded it and the way you've read it, and there is a remedy when the courts reopen, I can live with that. That's my comment.
No, I appreciate that, because it's all about, I keep trying to get that messaging out there. We have to work together as a team and as a community, because again, you have all these empty storefronts because the landlords, kicked them out for, these different type reasons, and then you have nothing to recover after you're done with this.
And who's waiting to move back in?
And who's
the guy who's
biting at
already
the bit
there
to move in right now? So I mean, some of this just seems like common sense. And yeah, I still recognize there's other circumstances. There's obviously probably landlords that want to get rid of a certain tenant, and there's certain tenants that maybe want to get out of their lease agreement. So
That's a good point.
But with the tenants, I think that they have a good cause for force majeure, and I think that everything else is just we're doing our best to navigate through this. So I think all the courts are closed anyway. So
And we're not arbitrators for tenant landlord disputes.
yeah, and we certainly don't want residents being kicked out in the street during a time when they're supposed to be at their homes and don't really have any other way of supporting themselves. So are there any other comments on this item? Or
Yeah, for what it's worth, I know a lot of landlords and such have mortgages that they too have to pay.
Correct.
I think two things. One is that if they work with their banks, I'm sure that their banks would work with them and extend it, basically deferring those payments to the back end, just tacking it onto the mortgage. I've read a lot about that in the last 2 weeks. So if they haven't already done so, I suggest they go and talk to their mortgage bankers about that. And the same thing would be true with tenants and with respect to car loans and things like this. There seems to be a lot of
and
flexibility.
To that point, I mean, every day I'm getting an email from, this mortgage company is, hey, you're not going to get charged this. We're going to work with you. Every credit card company has emailed me and sent me that same. I mean, it's like everyone is doing it. Not everyone, and then also some people have private loans, and that's a different issue. There's less regulation there, and it's
My knees are killing me.
But yeah, no. But I mean, that people.
So
are
the good
working.
news is everybody seems to be working together through this. The second thing is I think that landlords do have recourse. They can get help from SBA and other types of programs. So I don't think that. I think if we work together, as you suggested, we'll get through this.
And the bank holding that mortgage is going to get some help from Uncle Sam.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
They're a business just as well and can apply for their SBA, grant or loan.
Except for
or
Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
All right. So is there? I'll make the motion to pass staff recommendation here on this item.
I'll second the motion.
It's been seconded.
Mayor Paterno Clark,
Oh, reluctantly, yes.
Councilmember DeJarnis,
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Waite,
Yes.
Mayor Tuson.
Yes.